Morning, friends. You know, food is good. You need food to live. And without food, it kind of, even if you could live without food, food is the spice of life. You know, food is universal. It transcends culture. What I mean is, wherever you go, the fellowship and the food, it always goes together. Whether you're in the Caribbean, Africa, South America, United States, Canada, wherever. Today, I mean, people, it's synonymous, food and fellowship. I preached in Russia, and afterwards, that's inside the church. Afterwards, I got invited home. A family in the church invited me home to partake of food and fellowship. And a lot of the work that I do, the health evangelism work, a lot of the work is not done in the church. It's done in the home because it's done in the hearts, and you reach hearts in the home, not in the church. So we went into the church, the home, and they pulled out their best. They went down to the root cellar, pulled out all the good stuff, and they just made us feel very special. Set us down at the table. We enjoyed food and fellowship. And that was a beautiful experience I had in Russia. Darlene, we're about to have lunch. Preached in a church, and the family invited us home. So Daniel and I are about to have lunch. And it looks like it's going to really be good. So I'll let you know how things go after the lunch. Wow, a little close up here. Don't know what it is, but it sure looks good. You know, every place that you go, all the countries, they have their own specialty. I remember in the Philippines, the duck would be pecking out of the egg and you would take it and eat the thing. It's called bulak. In Hong Kong, they had bird nest soup. The bird's nest, you know, they wouldn't clean it, but they take the bird's nest and boil it. And this would be bird nest soup. In different places, they have different specialties. And I remember in Pakistan, I was there and I had met with some of the pastors in one of the local conferences. And afterwards, as we had our lunch, one of the pastors offered me their specialty. It was a little cup of this thick white substance. And I thought, well, what is that? He said, it's ghee. And of course, the thing to do, the appropriate thing, is to, you sample. You don't want to be, you want to be discerning. You want to be tactful. You want to be winning. So you sample their specialty, unless it's something like a snake or something. And I took a little sip and I said, what is this? What is that? He said, ghee. I said, well, you know, when I think of ghee, I think of like clarified butter, some kind of butter product. He said, well, it's sort of like that. And I said, well, he said, it's not butter. He said, it's milk. I said, no, this is like no milk I've ever had. He said, it's milk from the water buffalo. I thought, ooh, yuck. You know, that was your specialty. And a lot of good food and fellowship. Went over to the school, and there was a man making chapatis. And then after he made them, we had our lunch, and this is what we ate. I sat down, we had our meal. You tear off the corner of the chapati, use it for the spoon, and when the food is gone, you eat the spoon. Now, Darlene and I got out to Mentone, we were out in the middle of the country. Somewhere along the line, Darlene developed a very intense interest in wild foods. She thought we could live off the woods, live off the land. And so she was very curious. She got a book or two on how to identify wild foods and how to eat them. Now, I was a little fearful because I knew one of the things she was trying to gather was mushrooms. Now, mushrooms, you know, back in those days, the hippie days, it could give you a psychedelic experience, but it could also kill you. You got to be careful what mushrooms you harvest. And Darlene went out, found some mushrooms, made a pizza. At this point, we'd gotten an electric stove. Darlene was just tired of the camp stove. We had this one little shed that was full of rats. We put a stove in there and started cooking on an electric stove. So Darlene would make pizzas. And you know, the first time the pizza came out covered with mushrooms, she'd gotten out of the woods. I said, well, you go first. You have the first bite. And so she did. And she seemed to be okay, so I helped myself, and we had some really good mushroom pizzas, mostly with puff balls. They're the round mushrooms. It's very kind of safe. There aren't too many lookalikes that'll kill you with a puff ball. But Darlene began to gather acorns. She would grind them up in a meat grinder and make them into like these pancakes. They tasted almost like chocolatey and thick and just rich texture. They were good. And then she'd gather these wild greens out of the woods. I don't know all the different ones she got, but she'd come in with a plate. It looked like salad. But it wasn't, you know, chard and spinach and kale. It was things out of the woods. So we had that. And I'm sure it was very good for you. It wasn't the most tasty thing in the world, but Darlene said, well, what if we don't have anything else and we have to live off the woods? I said, well, this will be good. It'll hit the spot. And then we found the sumac. And sumac, of course, you could take in the cookbook. In the wild cookbook, it said you can take sumac. When it's red, you put it in water, leave it in the sun all day, and at the end of the day, you've got lemonade. So we were drinking some lemonade at the end of sumac-ade at the end of the day. Really getting into this idea of gathering food and everything. But you know, of all those experiences with the wild foods, maybe my favorite one was when we discovered the elderberries. We looked it up in the book, and it said it makes a delicious elderberry pie. And so I said, well, let's check that out. So when the elderberries got black, when they got ripe, we picked them. And Darlene made me this huge elderberry pie. Friends, I sat down, had the first bite of that pie, and it was out of this world. I ate the whole pie and got sick. You know, it was so good, I couldn't stop eating. So when the berries ripened up in the fall, I picked a big bowl of them, and Darlene made me an elderberry pie. And that was one of the best pies I'd ever had. We were in our early 20s. He lived in the city all of our lives. We were cooking on a fire. We didn't have a house. We were living in a car, cooking on a fire, and Darlene made me the elderberry pie. I sat down, I ate that whole pie. Yeah, I got sick. She cooked it in a frying pan on the fire, and it was one of the best things I've ever had. So these are elderflowers. And you notice a lot of these flowers and these things in the book of nature, they call back to your memory good experiences. So natural world, natural flowers, natural food, natural experiences. You say it sounds like you're addicted to food. Well, dear friends, everybody's addicted to food. You got to have it, you know. Now, you don't want to have too much. You want to be temperate in your habits. But we're all, you know, it's built into us. We got to eat to live. And so, not live to eat, but eat to live. I'm not looking for quantity of life. I'm looking for quality of life. And a good diet ensures a good quality of life. And being addicted is not all bad, right? You know, being addicted, it depends on what you're addicted to. In 1 Corinthians 16:15, Paul is writing about Stephanas and his household. He says in chapter 1 that he baptized them. Then he says in the last chapter of 1 Corinthians, he says, chapter 16, verse 15, he said, the household of Stephanas has addicted themselves. It's the only time in the King James Bible where you see the word addicted. They have addicted themselves. And you say, well, that's terrible. They all were addicts. Well, it depends on what you're addicted to. They had addicted themselves, and Paul writes, to the ministry of the saints. That's a good addiction, right? It's bad to covet if you're coveting your neighbor's wife or your neighbor's car. But 1 Corinthians 12:31 says, covet the best gifts. It depends on what you're coveting. And Darlene and I out there in the woods, we were coveting elderberry pies, and that's okay. And as time passed by, we have these fellowship experiences over our food. We would, Darlene would pick it. I'd help sometimes. You know, Darlene was the chief instigator of the effort to get wild foods, but I would assist. I would help. We would cook it, eat it together, and we're gaining a fellowship experience out there in the woods over the mealtime. And that's what Solomon was saying in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and 3, that what really makes a man happy is his food, you know, his work, his family. And I was finding this to be true. Now, through all this, Darlene was becoming a full-blown gung-ho gardener. We moved there in late fall, early winter. It was cold. By the time gardening season came around, Darlene had her plans laid out. And she rigorously and vigorously undertook the project of beginning a garden. Didn't know anything about gardening. Darlene never grown anything. But she had some books, and she went out, she staked off the garden. This is what we're going to do. And the garden became not just our classroom, but it became our gym. We got our exercise out there. And it became part of our fellowship experience, because now instead of just going out picking wild foods, we were growing foods. And to be honest with you, the tomatoes we grew and the corn we grew and the squash we grew was preferable to the wild foods. Now, if you're in a life and death situation, you want that wild salad. But if you're able to grow it at home and you take it in the house, you prepare it together. Sometimes we preserved it together, we canned together, we froze, we stored it, we dried it. That was just a beautiful experience with Darlene. We were being drawn together to each other. Didn't know it at the time. We were being drawn together with God. Now, it took a while. Again, this stretched over 10 years. But I saw that food and the wilderness experience and an interest in gathering wild foods, and that kind of had a spillover to herbs. Darlene became very involved in herbs and different things like that too. But it was helping our marriage, it was helping our home, it was helping our health, it was helping me spiritually and mentally. And that began a long a journey that ended today, and yeah, we're still involved in the garden.
It's good exercise.
He got a big garden across the street. I mean, a big garden, working hard, trying to grow a lot of food. But if we had to, if push came to shove, if there was some kind of major crisis, and I had to eat off the land, the person I'd want to have with me is my wife, Darlene. God bless you, my friends. You have a nice day.